In the lineup today, did Hillary Clinton just get caught spying on Donald Trump? We're going to be talking about the Durham filing, what it says, what it doesn't, how the media is twisting this story to avoid reporting it, and why this matters even more than you might think. Welcome to the explosive first episode of The Brittany Hughes Show. Everybody, and welcome to the premiere episode of The Brittany Hughes Show on MRC-TV. Thank you so much for being here with me. This is something that we have been wanting to do for a really long time, is launch a full-length podcast talking a little bit more in depth about some of these issues, social and political. So thank you guys so very much. I am so thrilled. This is awesome. I really cannot tell you how excited I am to get this off the ground. And it's a crazy time to be launching it. First of all, if it sounds like I have a cold, it's because I do. Seriously, of all weeks to wake up and have congestion, of course it would be the week that I have to launch this show. So naturally, that would be when it would hit. Woke up Monday, crazy congested, couldn't breathe, really sore throat. Apparently, it's not the Rona, though. Which is super weird because I thought that was the only thing we were allowed to be sick with for the last 2 years was COVID. I mean, seriously, it's like, you have the sniffles and it's got to be COVID. If you have a cough, it's definitely COVID. Gunshot wound to the face, COVID. So, apparently this isn't it. You can, in fact, still get sick with a cold, which is what happened to me this week of all weeks. But feeling better now, going to power through because... First of all, we have to talk about one of the biggest stories, I think, in recent American history. And I'm not exaggerating. And, I really don't like saying stuff like that a whole lot because, to use hyperbolic statements to say that something is the biggest or the most important or, I don't even really like using the word bombshell that much because I think that in today's era of clickbait, where everybody is competing for video views and clicks on a website and our attention spans are short and everybody's really, really busy. I think that those words tend to get thrown out there a lot to overemphasize something. And we end up getting desensitized to stories that really do matter because everything is heightened. Everything is extreme. Everything is an emergency. Everything is a bombshell. But this I truly believe is. I think that this is one of, if not the biggest political scandal in modern American history and definitely ranks up there throughout all of American history. And of course, I'm talking about the Durham files, which I'm sure you've heard about at this point. So I want to go ahead and dive right in because we have so much to talk about and so little time to talk about it. So I'm going to kind of recap this story really quickly. Again, it's been talked about largely in conservative circles for the past several days. If you are a connoisseur of more left-leaning, mainstream, I guess you could call it, media outlets, they don't consider themselves left-leaning, but they are. If that's where you get your news, if you get your news from the CNNs, from ABC or NBC, it's very unlikely that you've heard of this story. And if you have, you probably haven't heard it anything like this. So, we're going to backtrack a little bit, kind of nutshell this as best I can. It does get convoluted. It does kind of go down a rabbit trail. So here we go. Do you remember a guy named Michael Sussman? This is reaching back in the archives a little bit. Michael Sussman was the Clinton lawyer who was on her payroll back in 2016 during the election. And he had a meeting with the FBI about 2 months prior to the election. Is this ringing any bells? And he told the FBI that he had evidence linking Trump's campaign to a Russian bank, Alpha Bank. Okay. He was later accused and has been charged with lying to the FBI for failing to disclose a potential conflict of interest when he told them this information because he did not reveal that he was working for the Clinton campaign at the time. Now, he said that he was not working for any particular client. Turns out he was on the Clinton payroll. He claims that had nothing to do with this information that he got. He has pled not guilty to those charges. In the meantime, okay, another name that you might be familiar with, again, reaching back into the archives here, John Durham. He's special counsel. He's a top DOJ prosecutor. He was tapped during the Trump administration to lead up the investigation into potential spying on the Trump campaign during the 2016 election. Okay. He just filed documents in court last Friday alleging that Sussman, who again was on Clinton's payroll in 2016, who told the FBI he had information connecting Trump to Russia, that he coordinated with another client of his named Rodney Joff, who works for a tech company called Newstar. It's a Virginia-based tech company. And that Joff exploited his resources with researchers at the Georgia Institute of Technology to basically misuse a government contract that was meant for cybersecurity research, but was then exploited to instead spy on the Trump campaign. Okay, so again, we're connecting some dots here, and it's important when we talk about this story to talk about what the filing actually says and what it doesn't say, because there are some key points to what it doesn't say that the liberal media is using to call this whole thing a nothing burger and to sweep it under the rug and get out of having to tell you anything about it. So, some key points that are actually in the filing. Let's go through those first. First, Durham claims that he has evidence that Sussman, in coordination with Joff, tasked the researchers at the Georgia Institute of Technology to mine internet data to establish an inference and narrative tying then candidate Trump to Russia. In doing so, Tech Executive 1, Joff, indicated that he was seeking to please certain VIPs, referring to individuals at Law Firm 1, the law firm he worked for, Perkins Coie, and the Clinton campaign. Okay, so notice what it explicitly says here. It does not say that these researchers were tasked to establish a connection between Trump and Russia. Merely that they were tasked to mine internet data to establish an inference and a narrative. So according to this court filing, if this is true, they didn't really care about connecting Trump to Russia in an evidence-based, tangible way. This was not about just finding actual proof that the Trump campaign was in fact colluding with Russia. According to this filing, there is evidence to suggest that they simply wanted to create a narrative, something that could be used ostensibly to skew public perception that Trump may be coordinating with Russia. And according to the filing, this was done on behalf of the Clinton campaign. Now, it does not state that it was done at the direction of the Clinton campaign, but that it was done to at least please the Clinton campaign. Secondly, the filing also states that in connection with these efforts, Tech Executive 1, again, speaking of Joff here, exploited his access to non-public and or proprietary internet data. Among the internet data that he and his associates exploited was domain name system internet traffic pertaining to a particular healthcare provider, now known to be Spectrum Health, Trump Tower, Donald Trump's Central Park West apartment building, and the executive office of the President of the United States. Again, so listen to the exact language that the filing includes. Not that Joff came across this information, not that his internet company happened to stumble upon this connection in their daily comings and goings, or that this was just something that cropped up. They went looking for it, and he exploited his access, meaning that he misused something. He did this on purpose, and it was not the original intent of the government contract that the Georgia Institute of Technology researchers were supposed to be utilizing it for. This was supposed to be a cyber research or cybersecurity research government contract. And Durham specifically says that it was exploited. Now, this is incredibly important when it comes to how the left and their media lapdogs are trying to get out of reporting this story. This is why it is vitally important to understand this. So, The court filings, again, do not accuse the Clinton campaign of directly spying on Trump in that they directed all of this to happen. The New York Times has seized on that to carry water for the left, to carry water for the Clintons, as they always do, to protect the Clintons and to protect the Democrats by saying this in a recent article. The filing never said the White House data that came under scrutiny was from the Trump era, the New York Times says. They also add that it never claimed that Mr. Joff's company was being paid for by the Clinton campaign. So this is literally how dumb the New York Times thinks we are. That we can't connect some very, very basic dots. So it is true that the filing never explicitly states that the Clinton campaign was directly involved, that any of this was done through the direction of Clinton or her campaign. It does say that it was done to please the Clinton campaign, but not that the order came down from the campaign itself. That is important because that's an entirely different legal discussion. And if evidence comes to light that connects Clinton and the campaign directly with this, I expect that will end up in a story in the future. It is important to note, however, and this is something that's been known for a while, but now makes sense in context, that Sussman, the Clinton attorney that kind of kicked off this whole thing, Sussman, prior to meeting with the FBI to give them this alleged information that he had just happened to come by, did meet with Clinton campaign's general counsel, Mark Elias, prior to that FBI meeting. Now, the New York Times would have you believe that this information was stumbled upon by this tech company, that these connections via the internet, these IP addresses that were linked up between the Trump Tower and his apartment building and a Russian bank, again, which that story has come to absolutely nothing, but that those connections were legitimately obtained by this internet company in legitimate cybersecurity research that was being done. And that Sussman, this Clinton lawyer, just happened to be representing Rodney Joff at the time that he came by this information, but that Sussman also just happened to be working for the Clinton campaign at the time, and then just happened to have a meeting with her top lawyer before going to the FBI with this supposed information that he had, and that none of this at all is connected. That all of that just happened. I don't know why I have to explain this to anyone, but that's not a thing. That doesn't just happen. The amount of faith that it takes to believe that a Clinton-connected attorney just happened to be representing somebody who just happened to come across connections, alleged connections, that again ended up leading to nothing, between Trump and Russia, and that it had nothing to do with the Clinton campaign, who was the one person who would have benefited the most from that information. If you honestly are dense enough to believe that, your cornbread's not done in the middle. I don't know what to tell. I'm surprised you can tie your own shoes, because again, that does not just simply happen. The only reason for Sussman to have coordinated with Joff to exploit a government contract to try to dig up dirt on the Trump campaign, again, not to actually establish a credible connection to Russia, but simply to establish a narrative if these filings are true, the only reason to do that would be at the direction of the person who would stand to benefit most. You don't simply wake up one morning and think, I don't know, I'm going to put on some pants, head into the office, exploit a government contract, maybe spy on a political candidate. That's not something you just do. But that's what the New York Times would actually have you believe. And that's interesting because if you look in their article, they actually give a reason as to why they didn't publish this story until a couple of days after it had broken, because again, the New York Times is supposed to be on top of these things, right? And they attempted to justify it by saying this: these stories, quote, tend to involve dense and obscure issues, so dissecting them requires asking readers to expend significant mental energy, and time. The New York Times thinks that we are so stupid that we can't understand this story, that it's so convoluted, and that we are so out to lunch that they need to become the spaghetti strainer that catches things that we can't cognitively digest. That we need their help in ferreting out what stories we should consume and what we are simply incapable of understanding. And if it's not something that us average plebes down here can grasp, then they shouldn't have to report it. Which of course is a smokescreen for carrying water for the left and getting out of having to report things that they don't want to report, that make the left look bad, that make Democrats look bad. It has nothing to do with the average American's inability to understand. We are not that dumb. But that's what they want you to believe, just like they want you to believe that all of these connections, from Clinton to her lawyer to this tech executive, are absolutely nothing, and that the filing itself doesn't say what it says. Okay, now what's interesting here is that one of the things the media did think that we could understand just fine, which was far more convoluted than any of this, was the story that Sussman thought he had come up with, or at least had claimed to come up with, which was the Russian collusion story itself. I mean, you remember, right? A couple of years ago, I mean, this was nothing but news for 2.5 years, was the Russian collusion story. And the vast majority of it was based on hearsay and rumors. It was based on unnamed sources. It got so complicated you could barely follow it because the left was bending all over itself, trying desperately to establish this story that they couldn't even themselves keep straight. A Media Research Center study found that from January 2017 to July of 2019, the evening news shows at ABC, NBC, and CBS alone spent a grand total of 2,634 minutes covering the Russian collusion story. Now, for those of you who suck at math, and I do, I actually broke out a calculator here, that's 44 hours, almost 2 entire straight days. Now, that doesn't include their other programs. It doesn't include their Sunday news talk shows. It doesn't include CNN or MSNBC, who spent far more time on this than anybody else. It doesn't include the online stories that were all over their website headlines for days. None of that. Just those 3 networks and their evening shows alone dedicated 44 straight total hours to that story. That was something that they felt deserved the time of day. Even though most of that wasn't verified, it ended up coming out to nothing. Here are just a few of the stories based solely on speculation and rumor that the media covered as fact that ended up being debunked. CNN published an article entitled, "This May Be the Smoking Gun in the Russia Investigation." That article was based on a BuzzFeed article that claimed Trump directed his attorney Michael Cohen to lie to Congress about negotiations to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. Y'all remember that one? That was a big deal. BuzzFeed published this quote unquote, again, bombshell article that was supposed to blow the whole lid off of the Trump-Russia investigation, and it ended up not being true at all. And BuzzFeed ended up having to backtrack, and the whole thing was debunked by Robert Mueller, and that article is still on CNN to this day. You can still go find that article on CNN. CNN also claimed that Cohen would testify that Trump knew in advance about the infamous Trump Tower meeting. That ended up being false. And then they lied about where they got that story. They claimed that Cohen attorney Lenny Davis had declined to comment on it when he, in fact, ended up being their source. So they just straight up lied about that. They also claimed in another story that Anthony Scaramucci was involved in a Russian hedge fund. He wasn't. And yet when Trump claimed that he was spied on repeatedly, This is how the media responded to those claims.
There was no spying. There was.
It's Pizzagate. The conspiracy gene.
Exactly. It's Pizzagate.
The conspiracy gene is no more accurate than Pizzagate.
No one was spying on the president through the microwave.
No one spied on the Trump campaign.
There was no spying.
There was no spying.
No spying.
There was 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 no spying.
Wow. By the way, there was no spying, of course.
So now you would think that a media that is this obsessed with the Russian collusion story, that was this interested in conspiracy theories and deep schemes and, you know, just some real nitty-gritty hard stuff, you would think that they would be all over this court filing from Friday. And yet we have not hardly heard a peep. I don't know how many of you guys know this about me. Before I came to the Media Research Center, I was actually a reporter in a small town in Virginia, and I covered education and politics. Something like this, even on a small scale, in a small town, is journalism gold. Reporters fight over who gets to cover stories like this. I mean, this is something so massive that if you cover it and you get it right, can really make or break somebody's career. And so it's interesting that the media will not touch this with a 10-foot pole. Because by all journalistic standards, they should be absolutely all over it. This should, in fact, launch their own investigation into trying to uncover even more details, and yet we have got crickets. None of the Sunday morning talk shows talked about it. MSNBC and CNN will not touch it. And of course, the New York Times is trying to fall all over themselves to try to paint this picture of why the whole thing is totally on the up and up, and we shouldn't be worried about it at all. They are the ones who should be focusing on this story and helping connect all of these dots and establish the facts and ferret out the truth. And yet they are the ones who are literally not doing their jobs. They're as useful as a raincoat in a hurricane when it comes to any story that could potentially make Democrats or, God forbid, Queen Hillary Clinton look bad. And this matters. This matters. This is absolutely pivotal. And this is why I continue to cover this, because one of the things that I get asked most often when I do stories like this, at my job, why even bother covering this anymore? Why are we talking about how the media lies? Everybody knows that the media lies. Everybody knows that they're going to expose some stories and cover up other ones. Everybody knows that, if it's a story that paints Democrats in a bad light, or if it's a story that paints the Clintons in a bad light, or Joe Biden, it's going to get swept under the rug. Everybody knows this. Why even bother? Why harp on this anymore? Here's why. I'm going to give you an example of why this matters so much and why I am going to keep pushing on this every single time, regardless of whether it results in any tangible change. Back in 2020, after the presidential election, one MRC poll that we conducted found that 36% of Biden voters, not of all voters, of Biden voters, were not aware that there was evidence linking Joe Biden to corrupt financial dealings in China through his son Hunter. You remember that story? The media wouldn't cover it at all. None of the major networks would cover it at all. As a matter of fact, it was so censored on social media that it would get you kicked off of Twitter if you posted about it. If you posted the link to the news article, I believe it was from the New York Post, that alone would get you booted off of Twitter. Nobody would let you share that story. And 36% of Biden voters after the election said that they had not heard that story. 9.4% said that if they had known about that story, they would have changed their vote. If that were true, Donald Trump would have won the election with 289 electoral votes. It would have been a landslide. It wouldn't have even been close. We would not have even had a discussion about election integrity or whether everything was entirely on the up and up. It wouldn't have even mattered because it wouldn't have been close. This is why it is absolutely critical that the media do their jobs. that they don't bury stories that they don't like, that they report fairly and they report the truth, and that Silicon Valley and big tech does not censor stories that don't fit their political agenda, that don't go with their narrative. And it is fundamental that we continue to call out their bias when they refuse to do their jobs or they do censor stories. It is absolutely critical that we keep pushing back on this, that we keep sharing stories like this, that we keep reporting truth, and that we keep hammering this point even when we don't feel like it's doing any good. Because when the media is allowed to control the reporting and social media is allowed to control the dissemination of information, it has a direct impact on elections. It has a direct impact on public policy and the future of this nation for ourselves, for our children, and our grandchildren. These stories matter. And we are going to keep harping on this every single time because the stakes are so incredibly high. And with that, that's the amount of time that I have for today. Gosh, that went incredibly fast. Right before I leave, I do want to give a huge shout out to really one of the people that made all of this possible. And that is, of course, the great and indomitable Rush Limbaugh. Today is 1 year since his passing. Honestly, can't even believe that it's been a year. It feels like yesterday. And it's been a huge void, a massive void. And he is a huge part of why people like me are able to do what we do. He paved the way, really not just for conservative show hosts, but talk show hosts in general. He was an absolute icon. No one will ever be able to fill his shoes. So just want to recognize that and leave you with one quick, more fun story, because I know everything that we talked about today was really heavy and kind of dense. This one is just interesting, and I came across it today, and I thought I would share it with you guys. Winsome Sears, if you recall, this is the first black woman ever elected as lieutenant governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. She's Republican, which kind of just goes to show you how dirty, rotten, and racist Republicans really are to deign to elect the first black woman as Virginia's lieutenant governor. But apparently on Monday, part of her job is to preside over the Virginia Senate, and somebody on Monday hit her gavel. You know, so I guess this isn't the first time that this had happened. This had happened before. And it was absolutely hilarious because without even missing a beat, when she didn't have a gavel to call the chamber to order, she used her shoe.
Took my mallet. I don't have a mallet. They took it again. The Senate will come to order. Good morning. If any of you have seen my gavel, please return it. We'll find the offending senator. But as we have seen, the heel did just fine. One shoe can change a life. Ask Cinderella.
She actually took off her leather high heel and used it as a gavel. Absolutely hysterical. I'm going to leave you with that video. Make sure that you subscribe to this podcast on Apple and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check out the show on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And we'll see you back here next week.